Tallie.
Well, sorry, Brandon, should we mute ourselves?
Oh, you guys are good. You can stay unmuted. Would like to welcome everybody to the this Q&A, very special Q&A for the film 14. I would like to thank the cast and crew for joining us and Grasshopper Films. Just want to say, first off, I've seen this film twice already. It's definitely one of my favorite films of the year, and everybody from top to bottom, it's one of my favorite films I've seen. I want to start introducing some of the cast and crew, so I'm going to start with Dan. Thank you for joining us, writer director. Then we have Chris, the director of photography. Caitlin, who was one of the producers. Graham, another one of the producers. Norma, who played Joe. And then Tallie, who played Mar. Thank you all for joining tonight. So, Dan, I'm going to start with you. What does your writing process look like, and where did the initial kernel of this idea originate from?
It was like a couple different things, actually. One factor was that I knew that I wasn't sure I was going to be able to get enough vacation time from my day job to do a movie the way that I've been used to doing it. And that was actually a pretty big factor. So I was looking for something that I could shoot in pieces and without hurting it, where there could be time lapses. I'd never done that before, and it definitely had its drawbacks, but I felt that it was necessary. And then partly I was looking for a movie to do again with Tallie and for someone else who was going to play Joe, but who wound up not being in the movie. Norma was actually the third Joe, although she certainly has knocked everybody else out of memory. She's so good. And I was trying to come up with a story for two particular people, and I was kind of working it that way. I had this vague idea of, I was shooting to recreate the climactic scene of the movie The Mother and the Whore, because I had told the missing actress that somebody should make that movie with her. So then I thought, maybe I'll do it. And I was like gearing this project so that it would arrive at Francoise Lebrun's big crying scene in The Mother and the Whore. And finally I thought of the ending, and that was what cinched it. And I don't know if Tallie remembers, but my birthday party at 2012, I told her about that the movie was kind of a go in my mind, at least. And I told her what I had, which was mostly a vague idea. And then those last couple scenes were already detailed in my mind. The story about Joe that she tells to her daughter, and then the final scene. Should we be spoiling the film? I guess we should not spoil it too much.
No, probably not too, but I think it's okay if, for people, if you haven't seen it already, go check it out and then come back to the Q&A.
Anyway, the short answer is it was like a bunch of things. It was a whole bunch of different things.
And with this film, this is told over a multi-year, this is a multi-year story between these two friends. Was there a friendship, or was there something in your life that you used as inspiration for this story?
Not so much a friendship, but there was somebody in my life, maybe two people in my life, who gave me a kind of a Joe kind of vibe about the direction that they were going and how functional they were. And that I think I drew on from a couple different people, but the friendship just kind of followed from the other things, really. I knew, putting just the people that I conceived in the movie just created their characters, and the friendships kind of followed from their characters. It's actually really fun to write with people in mind, especially if they're like people that you find complex and interesting.
And then I want to talk to you a little bit, Tallie and Norma. What were some of your first reactions to the script and initial thoughts on your characters?
Norma, do you want to go first? Am I putting you on the spot?
You whatever you want. I can go first. I fell in love with the script. It was one of the first scripts, one of the only scripts where I've ever actually written like an impassioned plea to the director, which was embarrassing, but I was like, I'm doing it. Cause yeah.
Did you know that letter never arrived? I think they were trying to like save you. I haven't seen it. I haven't seen this letter to this day.
It may have actually, what it may have really been is a very emphatic email to my managers and agents. I may have just been like, guys, this is so good.
They were making allusions to like that you were very serious about the movie, but they didn't show me anything.
They were my translators then. They were trying to save my dignity. But yeah, I hadn't really ever read a script that was so poignantly focused on a female friendship, that seemed like it just felt really new, and it felt really exciting from a character perspective. I was fascinated by Jo. I thought that she was someone who I would really like to get to know, who I thought that I already kind of instinctively knew in some ways, and I also thought that the dynamic between them was something that I have seen in my own life, and that I think since the movie's come out, we've also heard a lot of other people saying, oh gosh, I was the Mara in this relationship, I was the Jo in this relationship, which is just a testament to how great it is as a script, because that's exactly how I felt. It was an immediate sense of knowing this dynamic. And I just really wanted to tell that story.
I already knew about it from having worked with Dan and hearing about it for a long time in advance. And so I think my relationship to reading it for the first time was with a lot of guidelines already in place and knowing where it was going. And having to like recast the little girl character, because Dan had already had in mind a little girl who I think he wrote that part for, right? Like she had a really strong energy that he really liked a lot.
But she just it took so long.
Yeah. Turns out when kids are little, they just get older really fast. But yeah, we had been talking about it for a while, and then the process of figuring out how to produce something that we knew was going to ideally take a long time. It just kept pushing back the actual production date, reading with other actors. So I had a really long time, I guess, is what I'm trying to say, to sit with it and get comfortable with it. And I still am so amazed that Dan sees me as somebody capable, or sees me as someone who could play the Mara character as someone capable, because it's so not how I see myself. I see myself as someone so fumbling. So I really feel really honored that he wrote Mara for me to play.
It's interesting. I would never, for some reason, you like write certain characters for certain people, and I would never write you as a fumbling character. I don't know. I hope you don't fumble as much as you're saying you fumble, but somehow my image of you is such that could never be. I think that's the way it is. Like when you have relationships with people you work with, you have a certain like zone, and they're them, but they're also like them in your mind, and so it's like a fusion. But the fusion works great as far as I'm concerned.
He also knew me already in the capacity as a teacher, because I used to teach before I came to New York, and then a little bit after. And the first thing, or one of the first things that he saw me in, I was working at a school at the time, and so he already had contextualized me as someone who could work with young kids.
Yeah, when she was auditioning for The Unspeakable Act, she after I met her, I went looking for stuff on her, or maybe she gave me stuff. And there was a dance class she was teaching where she was leading 50 little kids around with seeming lack of effort. I was impressed.
That was a good day. Something like that.
And just want to let everybody know that's watching, keep leaving your comments and your questions. We'll get to your questions in a moment. I want to pivot over to Caitlin and Graham. Could you talk a little bit about pre-production and what that was like on your end, and how much involvement you had during the casting process, if at all.
Caitlin, take it.
What?
Do you want to start?
Sure. So Dan and I went out for coffee because I had worked with Tallie on another film. And when this idea existed, we met, and it was sort of I had mostly done scripted shorts at that point. And so I remember we went out for coffee, and Dan went to use the restroom, and these two women sitting at a table next to us were like, "Are you trying to get a job with that guy? Because it's going really well." And I was like, "This is great. I love this." But I think that initially when we were talking about it, it didn't seem like that problematic to scale up to a feature, because this would be shot very similarly to shorts. And I think that, without anticipating that we would have casting changes and we would have life getting in the way, we were looking at it as like, oh, people can get a haircut and they can take other work and we can lose locations, and that's going to allow us a great deal of flexibility. And then I think I wound up, from the first time we had coffee to when we locked, the film was maybe 5 years, which is quite long. I think if you're not in a fundraising capacity to be working on an indie feature of this scale. So I think that I saw it as like a fun challenge for the first 3 years, and then those last 2 were in production. And it was sort of like, I mean, if we were still shooting this movie, we would get the pandemic in the middle of it. And that's sort of how it worked out. But I think that it's, I come from documentary, and so I there's a like sick part of my brain that thinks that that's like a fun challenge. And I haven't lost that yet. But in terms of casting, and Graham, maybe you can speak to your experience too. I think that this is something that Dan was very clear. Dan is incredibly clear about his vision, and that is across the board in terms of all artistic direction, in terms of camera work, in terms of casting. And he does a tremendous amount of pre-production on his own. And so it wasn't something where I think I like contributed some actors for supporting roles that I had thought of. But for the most part, it was something where like Dan has such a clear vision that I knew that Dan was the best person to make all of the decisions for the film.
Yeah,
you contributed actors, and so did Tallie. I know contributed a lot of actors, but I never kept track of like who's the people that got cast, where they actually came from.
Yeah, I think what Caitlin was saying is really true, though, where, every director you work with is different, but working with Dan, I was always thinking, oh, I should really do this. I should make this chart, or I should organize this. And then you would go and look in the folder, and Dan did it like 3 months ago. And so you're always like, oh. So even though he's not credited as such, Dan is very much a producer director also, because the amount that he puts into the storyboards, to the casting, to the prop selection, he really like lays all it out on paper before you're even at the stage where most directors are talking to someone else about it. So it's really interesting working in that sense, because even though it went on for a really long time, I think I felt the most prepared in a weird way that's ever happened on a film that I've worked on. There've been a lot less improvisational ideas, and a lot less casting somebody 2 days before the shoot and things like that. But yeah, I got involved much later than Caitlin. I had worked with Dan previously because I'd worked at another distributor, which some of the people that I worked with, the person who is now who founded Grasshopper, which is releasing this film at another company called Cinema Guild, and we did the release, the home video release of his previous film, also at Tallie, called The Unspeakable Act, which if you like 14, you should definitely also check out. So I knew Dan through that, and then I had worked with him as an actor. He's an excellent actor. I recommend that if you need somebody, you consider casting him. So I came on later because as it was such a complex, long shoot, and everybody knew it was going to be this complex, long, how many months was it in total?
18 from beginning to end of the shooting.
And so we knew, especially because we didn't even know the exact dates, that there was a high probability that Caitlin wouldn't be available 1-2 day stretch. And so having worked with Dan before and just loving his films, I felt like I don't know, I was like an excited fan getting to be on set. I really felt like honored to like watch him work. And
just to blow Graham's horn a little bit, he is the person who, one and only person who found one of my movies, The Unspeakable Act, to distribute. Before that, none of my films have been distributed. There was no competition for that one. It was totally Graham who, like, you know, found the film, took it to Ryan. So without Graham, who knows if I would ever have entered the world of film distribution.
Yeah,
I don't know about that. But.
I did after watching 14. I did watch a trailer for The Unspeakable Act. It is on my queue list, so I definitely am looking forward to checking that out and going back and revisiting some of your older work. I want to also talk about the relationship between Chris, the DP, and Dan. What was your relationship like as a DP director, and how much planning went into the film? Was storyboarding, or was a lot of it spontaneous on set?
So you can lead, Dan.
No, I was going to point it to you.
Oh, okay. I guess I'll sort of piggyback off of what everyone else is saying about Dan's excessive preparation. He has storyboarded the whole movie maybe years in advance. I don't even know, and would occasionally make adjustments based on like a change in location, and they weren't just like a storyboards are like, these are the different shots that we might need. They're like, these are the shots that happen at different points in the scene. So in that sense, you know, it's a different, I mean, every director has like a different amount of prep work or how much they want to rely on the DP for one thing or another. But in this case, I feel like my job was more sort of translating these images that he has in mind in a way that like feels consistent for the whole film. And also, you know, I guess kind of Dan and I had talked about movies that he was interested in and visually the stuff that he sort of drawn to, which was all very like naturalistic. So I think my other main objective was sort of to be invisible so the camera work isn't ever calling attention to itself. The scenes don't really look lit, even though we're using lights. So it looks as much like sort of we put the camera down in real life and pointed it at what's happening. I mean, to some extent, I also think that like the prep, because he's prepared and knows, you know, exactly what we're going to need in a scene before we go into it, and we're not going to be adding shots midway through, it makes the approach to lighting a little bit simpler, because you know, like, oh, we're only going to look in this area of the room, and we're never cutting to anything else. It doesn't need to match anything else. So we can use, for the most part, things that are available and add a little bit and not have to worry that like, oh, we lose the light, it's not going to match something else in the scene. So I think it allows you to embrace a little more what the world is giving you in a way that you can't always do when you know you're going to be getting 10 angles for a scene and shooting it all day long. So that's...
Chris was recommended to me by Bing Bryan and Kyle Mozan, who directed For the Plasma a few years earlier. And they were raving about Chris and said that he like saved them so many times. And I know what they mean, because like he's such a like rock on the set. He's really, you know, radiates kind of confidence. If there's some part of you that's going a little bit crazy or getting worried, he's like the antidote to that. So I think that their recommendation was spot on.
I also want to compliment Chris on just how little I felt aware of the camera. I think especially having just comparing it to some other jobs I've done, I even for the most vulnerable scenes, I was not aware that it was there. He manages to just like blend, and the camera itself never felt like, you know, you're never like this close where it's like right in your face and it's, you know, distracting, or you have to kind of like get into it anyway. I don't know how he did it, because there were times where the camera was really close, but it genuinely never felt invasive or confusing or whatever. So he's
Norma, I love that you jumped in just now, because I also was gonna just say like, yeah, you should hire Chris, because he's so lovely to work with. He's so nice to work with, and he's so good at what he does. I really just am so excited for the next time we get to work together, whenever that is. Same goes for Caitlin and Graham. I'm so happy that it's the 5 of us that you have here. Caitlin and Graham are both such excellent producers, and it was such a special crew that we had.
Not only is Chris very good, but he just radiates like calmness and strength on the set. And anybody who's ever done an indie film knows how much you need that. So we're all.
A lot of that is due to your preparation, though, too. I feel like most films, people are much more confused about what they want to do, and it gets chaotic quickly when everybody's changing their minds. And
it's interesting, you know, that dynamic, or that the pros and cons of spontaneity versus preparation. I almost, you know, like for me personally, there's not that much choice, because I'd be too anxious just to throw everything into the air and hope that they landed. But a lot of people love that and do great work that way. It's interesting how, like, you know, you pick a creative style which like makes one feel better or makes one able to function. It's interesting how that works. You don't plan it that way, but that's the way it comes out. So you realize later.
I want to go back to also talking about the some of the scenes. I know some of the big scenes in the film, because a lot of people have been commenting on the big scene where Joe shows up to Mara's apartment and has that breakdown and they fight. Tallie, Norma, Dan, whoever wants to take the lead on this question, I guess especially for Tallie and Norma, how did you guys build up the rapport between the two of you to portray this like decades-long friendship? And for Dan, for these big emotional scenes, did you end up doing a lot of takes on set?
You guys going to go first?
Norma is an angel. Being friends with her is so easy. We really hit it off very quickly. We immediately after meeting, like and this is when we both still smoked cigarettes. Can I say? I'm sorry. We like shared cigarettes in the park, and then like had burgers, and just like it was like a good date where it just keeps going.
Yeah,
it's very immediate, easy connection.
Yes, also agreed. Yes, same.
We're friends in real life.
Yeah, we're really
good. The last time we were together.
Yeah, we hung out before the pandemic happened, and we played Dungeons and Dragons. But I think like, yeah, it was really easy for Tallie and I to like tap into that connection. I don't know how much of that was how good the script is, and how much of it was me and Tallie having a really easy, wonderful rapport as friends. But by the time we shot that scene, we'd already been filming for like, Dan, how long?
That was the 4th out of 5 shoots. So
at least a year.
Yeah. So like a while, and we'd been through a lot. Like this is everyone, really, the entire cast, crew, everybody was like a family at this point, because we'd been through so much with the filming process. And I think like reaching that sort of like moment in the script, we all obviously, like, I felt a lot of pressure to make sure, you know, it was good enough, and there was a lot riding on that scene in terms of their relationship. So I think we were just lucky to have a good script, have a good crew, have a great relationship, and it made it all easier.
I think Norma functions well under pressure, because my sense was that she was waiting for that scene and that she wanted to nail it. I didn't get the feeling that she was shaky or anything. She was like, okay, here it comes. And you can't do too many takes of a scene where someone's crying. Of course, I tend to do a lot of takes just for fun. But we did, I think, 3 takes through it, and Norma said, I don't have any more water left. And I said, we're golden, don't worry about it. And then we did Tallie's side of the scene, which I actually really love, because I think any really emotional scene like that needs some counterpoint or needs some grounding. And Tallie really aced her side of the conversation, which was done second, but it was like, so giving Joe stuff without bleeding on her and without matching her and without going to the slightly crazy place where Joe was. It was really beautiful.
Yeah, and it wouldn't have been possible without, obviously there's a lot of talking that Joe has, and there's a long monologue-y crying thing, but there is no way that scene would have happened if it weren't for Tallie, because she really, they're like a seesaw the whole movie. They have to be each other's balancing point in an energy sense as well. I think the way that Tallie played that scene, the way that it was she was so present, and so from Joe's perspective, from my perspective, it was kind of I am here, but I don't know what to say or what to do. And that was such an amazing thing to play off of, because it just makes you feel so much more alone in a wonderful, useful for the scene kind of way, because she was 100% there, and there was no way she could understand. And it was essential for that frustration and falling apart for her to be like that, for the loss of that to be so present, I guess.
And I just got 2 questions from the chat. Both people are asking the same question, and I know there's a little bit of, well, it is a big spoiler. So if you're watching, just, mute real quick. But they're asking Norma, what was it like lying in a coffin while still being alive?
What do you mean? I didn't lie in a coffin. There's no coffin. It was weird. It was real weird. Also, because we were in a real funeral home where there really is, that is really where coffins go in that funeral home. So I was very much this is where the dead bodies go, and I'm yeah. It was definitely a weird experience. That was one of the last scenes we shot together, and I remember there was a moment where I wrapped. I was done having been in the coffin, and people were like, "Do you want to go home?" And I was like, "No, I have to stay for Tallie. She has her big scene now." Because I think it's really important to keep the integrity of the scene and have if you're gonna have a dead body, dead, alive, it was really weird. Being the body, I think, was an important aspect of the scene for her to be able to play off of. So I actually stayed in the coffin for a good day. I don't know. But it was a long time, and they made it very comfortable for me. There was a pillow. It was there was some foam that I could lie on. It wasn't just a hard surface. And so my job was really easy. I just lay there. But it was definitely a bit of a trippy moment to be.
We have some great set photos that we can't use because spoilers.
Yeah, there's a lot of pictures. I think Grace, our wonderful set person, she took a bunch of pictures of me just kind of leaning over the coffin, making funny faces and stuff.
After Norma gets her Oscar, then we can share that.
And Tallie, I want to ask a question, especially about acting with the young actress who played your daughter. What was that like?
I'm so glad you asked about little Lorelai. So the very first thing that we shot, we walked out of the funeral home hand in hand, and it's that very, very long shot that the credits roll over. And she asked, "Where are all the people who are watching the movie?" And I was like, "God damn it, we shouldn't have told her she was going to be in a movie," which was sort of my thinking the whole time. But I knew that Dan had already been telling, and Kelly too had been telling her, you're going to be in a movie, to get her ready for it. But I kept thinking, she's 5. The less she knows, the better. We have to keep this really playful for her and really enticing and exciting, but she can't know that the cameras are even on. And from that point on, it was always a challenge. And she had known for a while that she was going to be in a movie. But what I loved about her saying that was that it's such kid logic, because she perceives a film as also being an audience member. So the reason that she asked where are all the people watching the movie is because she was like, okay, so we're in the movie, so where's the audience? Which is so cool. And then she said, I don't like outside movies because we were walking outside. I was like, yeah, I know, they're boring. And she's like, yeah. And she is incredibly funny. She knows that she's funny, and she is a star. It also, like, she's 5 and we had to bribe her with a lot of candy and stuff. So bless her heart, it really felt really not okay sometimes. Just like bribing this 5-year-old with more sugar.
Lorelai is the daughter of our hair and makeup person, Kelly Miller, and so we had a built-in kind of control system on the set. But so we would defer to Kelly all the time
when it was time, like, for an actual break, or when Lorelai was just feigning. But I don't know. I mean, I'm not teaching right now, but I love kids so much. There's nothing better. So, I mean, she at times, I guess, was challenging, but also, I don't know, not really. I was ready for that. I was ready to work with her. I was really excited to be working with her. And I mean, God, she's so beautiful, and you can just put a camera on a kid and never be bored. They're the best. So I had a great time with her. I did feel really bad that we were like tiring her out the second she arrived every day. She was like, what are you, like, during the story, telling her the story about Joe. We would start over and she would start rolling her eyes.
after 2 takes, she was done. But we're like, no, we do many more than 2 takes on this set. And it took all Tallie's skill to keep it going. But after a while, it was like Stockholm syndrome. I think after a certain point, she thought to herself, I'm never going to get off this set with these lunatics unless I give them something that they will accept. And so you could see after a certain number of takes, you could see her like first like agreeing to play along and then actually having fun with it.
I think that's a really good point. Like the last one where that we use in the movie where she says that was a good story?
Well, that's the one we used, but I can't remember if it was the last one.
So funny. It kills me because she'd already heard it a bunch, but like she liked that version. And if you know that background and if you watch her, you can see her like she already knows what's going to happen. But man, it was so funny. When she rolled her eyes, I don't know if you still have it, but I was like, Lorelai, you can't roll your eyes. We have to start over.
It's in the movie. It's just that nobody sees it. But I know it's there because I could see you bringing her back. I could see you like using that as a cue to like try to focus Lorelai. But the fun thing about that from a writer's point of view is that, you know, Tallie knew that, you know, she couldn't do everything just the same. So she would go off on these flights. She was really like improvising and using all this backstory, which was sometimes mine, sometimes Tallie's. And so it was really fun to see all this backstory like pouring out and be put in the right place.
Got a question from Grant. He asked, and this is a question I was hoping to ask too. I think this, I guess, is for Chris, Dan, Caitlin, Graham, whoever wants to answer this. Are you able to talk about the process behind the train station sequence? If he said it felt like a glimpse into time passing by. I was also wondering, like, how, you know, achieving that such a long sequence. Did you guys have to do more than one take of that, or was that a one and done take?
I think it was 4 takes, was it? I think we did it 4 times, and I think any of them, they all worked reasonably well. There wasn't a lot of catastrophe. I think before the first take, everybody already knew what to do. Tallie knew when to come out, and so it was just a matter of you know, letting the commuter action of Katona settle to the state that one wanted it to settle to. Because it's kind of fun that you see in that shot so much. You see the way that the commuter stuff works. You see people getting in the passenger seat of cars, and I think that Tallie's only direction was like try to let 2/3 of the crowd come out before you come out. I don't know if that's an answer to the question, but that shot was always I was like so like proud of that shot in advance. I'm saying I was like bragging to everybody how I was going to stop the movie dead for like 4 minutes, and then along the way in the editing, there was some question about that shot. It was definitely is the thing in the movie that most advertises that the film is not a commercial film, or that it's a little got something arty going on in there. And I finally decided, oh well, I can't cut it out now. I've been on this tip for too long. It was beautiful though. I thought it was really like I was like crying on the first take when the camera picked Tallie out. Like Chris just like left the camera perfectly still. He was operating, and then followed Tallie as she started to move. And so it's kind of picking her up, knowing it was about her, was this kind of gradual thing. And I don't know why, it just really hit me emotionally.
Yeah, I personally watching that film, I love the shot, and it really it's amazing pulling that off. It was really cool. Caitlin and Graham, I had a question here. They were asking, because of the current pandemic, what's distribution of the film been like so far? Has it changed from your initial plans for distributing the film? Obviously, with the virtual release, do you feel like you're getting a broader audience with this through a virtual platform?
This is very much Graham's lane, and so I'll allow him to speak. I can only say comparatively, I have 3 movies in theaters this year that never would have seen the light of day. And I think we were all really thrilled going into 2020 that 14 had distribution, and that we were going to be able to play in the States, because we had been, mostly doing European and international film festivals. And then, it's a bummer we're not all in Brooklyn watching the movie, but the fact that it's in Tallie's art house in Ketchikan, and, playing at the Garden, which is where I got my cinema education growing up. And I just don't know if this film would have had the legs. But this is very much, as I said, Graham, I think that you can speak more to it.
Yeah. Well, so I, for brief backstory, I worked in theatrical distribution for 10 years and working on foreign films and independent films and documentaries. And, I think I can't speak for Dan, but I think, of course, it's sad that it's not being shown in theaters, although it also felt like somehow that got done. Like, it happened with the festivals, it happened with the Spanish release and the Brazilian release, everything else. And the thing that I think is really unique about this moment, and even doing the virtual release this way, is that you can play nationally in a way that this size film doesn't play nationally. I mean, we would have for sure played New York, Chicago, LA, and some other places for sure, but it's on how many? It's on like 80 or 90 virtual cinemas, right, Dan? Something like that?
More than 85.
And it has been for weeks and weeks. So, the traditional, struggle is that, okay, you get the actual distribution, you're all excited, you open New York, you play 1 week. If you're really lucky, you play 2 weeks, and then it's kind of over. So it's a very anticlimactic experience as an independent film. And I think that this has allowed it to have a much longer life and a much broader critical reception, because I think it's gotten a lot more coverage in places outside of New York. New York is, for numerous reasons, 90% of the independent film market in the US. And it's very hard to get on screens at smaller cinemas for numerous reasons. So I think it's actually, been good for the film in an interesting way. And I know that Grasshopper has been happy with the virtual attendance. So I think it was a big question mark when it began, but now I feel like it's been completely fine.
Can there be any doubt that we were hugely the beneficiary of this horrible virus?
Yeah.
Can there be any doubt whatsoever?
Yeah. I also think from just a human standpoint, it's really nice in terms of accessibility for a project like this, and something that foregrounds female friendship, that it isn't something where you have to live in a zone where it would make it. And in the years before, I've spoken to people who live in Arizona, and cinephiles all over the country who are very limited or who are relying on a streamer to be able to get films, and it usually comes much after their release, if at all, because it's a challenging market. And I think that this has been an interesting time, and I will run into a movie theater and like hug the seat for 20 minutes as soon as I possibly can. But there's different access, and those barriers to access have been removed. And I think that that's something that's come up in this space that I'd like to look at more for like women-led projects by and featuring people of color, and how that can be an industry shift because we don't have to have the same concept of what's commercial anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think, you know, looking at our theaters, like we have people that have visited our theaters in the past and they've moved out of state, you know, and then we even have an art house theater, even a movie theater near them, and for them to send messages to us thanking us that seeing these movies and this curation of movies, very thankful to be able to see a movie like 14 through our virtual platform. I got one last question, and I'm posing this to everybody. I guess I'll start with Dan first. Is there anything that you learned or that surprised you during the production?
I was surprised a lot. I learned a lot, but I thought that maybe it was possible to do something that could be done in small pieces and build in flexibility. It turned out you're just setting yourself up as a target for fate, and it was not so easy. I should have been able to figure that out, but I don't have any regrets because I've done a fair number of movies according to the indie rule book, which is as few actors as possible, as few locations as possible, increase your chances of nothing falling apart. And it was nice under any circumstances to like do a different kind of story, one that, you know, wasn't like so, you know, it didn't have as much unity of place and time as most indie films are forced to have for practical reasons. So I learned stuff, but I'm glad I didn't have a chance to apply what I learned, because what I would have applied would be not to do it, and I don't really want that. All the trouble that it set me up for isn't as important as the fact that it's so cool. It's a different kind of project, and you don't really get a chance to do all the projects you want to do on small budgets.
Chris, is there anything that surprised you or that you learned from DPing in this project?
I think not huge surprises, but I do think that, you know, I sort of thought it would be convenient to sort of do an indie movie in pieces because it's an easier time commitment if you're also trying to work on other things. But it was more challenging in different ways, just partially in terms of trying to maintain a look that you've sort of set at the beginning of the movie even though you may have changed some of your ideas about how you'd like to do things, like over time when you're able to watch the first 15 minutes of the movie and reflect on what you were doing and say like, well, you know, maybe I would want to change like this and this, but you don't want to make too big of a step that it doesn't feel like it's the same movie anymore. And you're not always working with the same crew, whereas like if you work on a movie for 4 weeks straight, you sort of develop a language with the people you're working with, and you can sort of get into a groove, and like the last week you're moving, you know, 3 times, 4 times faster than you were in week 1, but I don't feel like we ever quite we didn't benefit from that sort of momentum that you get in doing a project all at once. Not that it was, I mean, I don't feel like we had insurmountable challenges or really hard days the way you do sometimes on lower budget movies. I think it was scheduled very realistically, partially just because of availability and locations. I think helped it to not stack too many things at once. but yeah, and I think you learn. I think it was just that there were different challenges in something like this. That in one way, on one hand, you think it'll be easier, and then there's other things that come up that make it a different challenge.
In Q&As, people ask quite often, was it hard for the actors with these big breaks in time in between? I'm going to throw this one to the actors because I would always say to people, I don't think they were in the least bothered. I don't think they had any trouble finding or losing their characters.
No, we were good. I think it really helped that the passage of time is in the script. It's supposed to cover a large period of time. But I think, partly as Tallie and I said, we really like each other. So it was easy enough to kind of like get back into the swing of things as a duo and like help each other kind of get back into it. But it also didn't really feel, I do think Chris is right in the sense that like we didn't necessarily benefit from the momentum that you get from a long shoot, because as a group, we had to kind of like get back together every time and be like, all right, where were we? Where are we going? What's next? But that never affected the actual process of filming, and it never affected from a storytelling or from an acting perspective. It was actually maybe even helpful because we were able to imagine that there had been a passage of time, because there literally was, for the characters as well. And I think that made it easier to, just jump back in.
Yeah, and Tallie, was there anything that surprised you about your role as Mar that you learned from the character?
Well, I think, before I forget, Goldtown Nickelodeon Theater is actually in Juneau.
Yes, right.
I'm friends now with with Pat Race and, oh no, I'm forgetting her name. Erasure of Women, there I go. The people who run the theater in Juneau are awesome, and they also brought Snowy Bing Bongs, which is another indie that I worked on that's so good, up to Juneau.
Do you have a following up there? Do people come to see Tallie films?
We didn't get a lot of people for Snowy Bing Bongs, which is their loss. But boy, God, that movie is so good. Who was that dance comedy trio who made it? But I think what I learned, I guess, is just that when I make my own films one day, which is a goal, just to work as much as I can like Dan, and as a director, someone who prepares so completely, because it's such a relief to be in the hands of a director who knows exactly what they're looking for. And I just had that assurance again, even though like I don't know, I wish that I could be more of an automaton and just do exactly what I'm told, but I think I'm a really stubborn person, and because I also have my own vision, like I tend to push back a lot against my directors, which I'm sure they just can't get enough of. And is an angel. But I think just that reminder that Dan, we're just so lucky to have him as an American director, and I feel really blessed that I got to work with him again and that he trusts me and wants to work with me.
Definitely want to work with him.
And Caitlin Graham, was there anything that surprised you or that you learned from taking part in this film?
I think going off of what people have been talking about the difficulty, because for sure one of the first things I thought before it was covered so much was that how much more difficult it was to do the start and stop structure. Then I think the thing I learned from the process and from going through that process is when you work on every other film I've worked on, the first day is the worst day. You use the least footage from the first day. Sometimes the whole first day is thrown out. And we had 5 first days. And I don't really see any weakness about those first days in the final film. And I think that is because of how much preparation Dan had done, and the fact that he was able to have this hyper preparation. Because something I've also experienced before is that a really hyper organized director can be really thrown off if something goes wrong or if something changes suddenly on them. And while I know Dan would say he's emotionally thrown off, I don't think it throws him off that much because he even has prepared the like BC direction of where to go. So there was a fluidity to that from the preparation that I feel like I learned a lot from watching Dan do.
I appreciate it, but fluidity is probably not the right word. You're describing pathological anxiety.
Well, however you want to define it, I think it's a useful trait.
Yeah. And I am surprised by and excited by that despite it being a little bit of a disaster magnet, that this is a good film that indicates that if you do have limited time off work and limited funds, you can make something that a bunch of people see. And related to that, sort of like, I know Dan's pathological anxiety, but I don't think that it bled into other people's business. And I think that that's something that should be lauded, and sort of similar. It's sort of a takeoff of what Chris was saying, that we didn't ever get that, that like crew getting into like lockstep with each other to be able to move very quickly, because we brought in a lot of new people. But I was really surprised by how wonderful our crew culture was, and that even though we rotated in a bunch of people, we just really lucked out with working with a lot of really incredible people, including a lot of people who would just PA for us for free for a day or two. And that there was sort of this like culture of eagerness, and there wasn't, and you know, that was like led by Chris and led by Graham and Craig Webster, who is our AD. And just the idea that everyone who came onto the set sort of stepped in with the like, this is fun, we're making a movie, we're going to make hard and make a movie, and we all like each other. And with like rare few exceptions, we managed to get a great group of people together who all wanted to do that. Which, when you are kind of reinventing the wheel every time you have a shoot, is like just full of wild cards, and our wild cards all played really nicely.
Well, I think, I'm going to wrap it up there. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you, Caitlin, for being the lifeline to reach out to the cast and crew of 14. Really appreciate it. But thank you to everybody. Thank you for this film. If you haven't checked it out, please check it out. It's on our virtual theater. And yeah, I look forward to the things that everybody does next. And hopefully we can have future films of everybody's up on our big screen when we get back up and running. So thank you again, everybody.
Thank you so much, Brendan. This was so fun.
Great to see everyone.
Bye.
I miss you guys.
Miss you too.